Hi, this is Catherine Schneider from the Fitchburg Historical Society. And the Fitchburg Historical Society has been collecting stories from Fitchburg residents about how things are going during this historic time we're living in with COVID, how it's impacted how government is being conducted, education, business, all those things have been impacted. And so this afternoon, we are so happy to welcome Sonia Short. Sonia is the Chief Elections Inspector for District 3 in the city of Fitchburg. And of course, 2020 has been quite the year for elections in Fitchburg and all the challenges that it's presented. So we have Sonia here to inform us on how the elections were conducted and how the pandemic impacted all of that this year for Fitchburg particularly. So Sonia, thank you. Welcome. I'd like to ask, first of all, could you tell us how you got involved helping with elections in Fitchburg, and then what your role was in the elections this year?
Okay. The short answer is I was invited. Muriel Stoneman, a longtime Fitchburg resident, was an elections inspector. And at one point she just invited me. She said, why don't you come and volunteer? So in about 2005, I think it was, I did. And over the years worked at several of the different districts, mostly doing registration. I was very comfortable with a computer, and a lot of our elections inspectors were not. And so registration was something that had to be done on a computer. And so that's what I did. And then at the end of 2015, when I retired, I took the training, and because they were short on chiefs for the districts. And I took the training. And so in 2016, I became the Chief Elections Inspector for District 3. And that's where I've been ever since. That's where I've been serving.
All right, great. Thanks, Sonia. And of course, COVID-19 was a significant factor in how the elections were conducted all year. In the spring of April 7th presidential preference, and then August 11th, we had the partisan primary. November 3rd, of course, the general election. Would you describe the way Fitchburg prepared for and conducted each of these elections in light of the challenges that were presented by COVID-19?
Oh, certainly. Of course, the April election was the first one that COVID really was around. And so at that point, as you know, most of the elections helpers are seniors, and seniors are a fairly at-risk group. And many of our seniors decided that they weren't going to help. So we were really, really shorthanded for the April election. But happily, Governor Evers gave us the use of our National Guard. And they were just tremendous. Each of the districts had probably anywhere from 6 to 8 guards people there to help. And they helped all day, actually the day before and throughout the day, doing various tasks. They were really, really fun to work with. Then for the other elections, many more people decided that they would take the risk. And younger people, I had one volunteer who said, yeah, my grandma told me that I needed to come and do this. So we had a considerably different group of folks, but plenty of folks to come in to help us with the other elections. But for each of the elections, we instituted a lot of precautions, shall I say, a lot of safety steps. Everybody wore masks. We practiced the social distancing, actually putting X's tape on the floor to make sure that they were spread 6 feet apart. We got sneeze screens, the plexi screens for each of the folks who were working at check-in, at registration, at the ballot tables. Um, then we also had workers who were, the only thing they were assigned to do was to actually clean. And so they had the spray bottles of sanitizer and would clean the voting booths, clean the pens that people used, clean all of the surfaces throughout. And uh, the voters were encouraged to actually bring their own pens, so that they didn't even have to use ours. So there were a lot of things that over time, and each election we got better at it, did more. But a lot of those precautions that today are pretty commonplace, but back in April that wasn't the case. So that's what that's how we prepared anyway.
Thank you. Thank you, Sonia. It sounds like a lot of new people were involved in the elections than had ever had an opportunity to do that before.
Oh, very definitely, very definitely. We had, in fact, for the November election, um, in my morning crew, I had 6 people who had never worked before. My afternoon crew, I had 9 people who had never worked before. So, yeah, lots of new folks.
Wonderful. The pandemic has done things that we never would have anticipated, I think, in terms of bringing out new election workers to experience what that's like. Um, well, there was, of course, concern for the voter safety generated a significant increase in requests for absentee ballots, particularly for the November 3rd presidential general election. How was this handled in Fitchburg? And then how were you involved, Sonia?
Okay. Um, yeah, it really did. Early on, people were requesting absentee ballots, and as you know, there are rules about everything, and definitely there are rules, laws about how we handle the absentee ballots. And there's a certain window of time that the clerks have to actually get the ballots out and mailed. They have to get them out in time for the overseas voters, those folks in the military, who of course still want to vote here, for their elections. And this year it was especially a short window, a very just a few days, that we had to get the ballots out because the Supreme Court had to weigh in on who exactly was going to be on the ballot. There was some controversy there. And so in fact, it would have been impossible for the city employees to get these out on their own. So they enlisted the help of all of us chiefs. So we came in, um, when the ballots come in, um, they are checked into the WisVote system, and it's the WisVote system that can generate all of the labels for the ballots going out. And so we were putting labels on both the mailing envelope as well as the return envelope. We were preparing the ballots. They all have to be stamped with absentee. They all have to be stamped with the proper wards. We have to make sure that we get the right ones to the right people. Just in my district alone, we had 4 different ballots for November, and it's all based on which ward they're in, district, and which school district they are a part of. So we have a lot of ballots, and there's a lot to put together. So we folded everything, inserted it with the instructions, and then got all of those envelopes out so that Tracy, our city clerk, could get them out on time when she needed to. So yeah, it was a lot of work to get
Sounds
those
like
out.
it. Sounds like a major task within a short period of time to get done. You were
Yeah.
certainly under time constraints there. Could you also talk about how the early voting in-person absentee voting from October 20th through the 30th went at the Fitchburg Community Center? And I know curbside voting was also available. So how was that conducted, and then how did that work out?
Okay. Um, there's early voting is always an option for people. And early voting, I think a lot, in fact, I know a lot of people that came in didn't realize that early voting is really in-person absentee voting. It's still absentee voting. Nothing can be counted until election day. Nothing can be opened, you know, it's everything has to wait until election day. So usually the clerks take care of all of the in-person voting, the early voting, right there in the office, you know, right there, kind of in the hallway. But for this presidential election, we knew that it was going to be big. And we also, of course, had to think about social distancing and COVID safety. So we set up in Oak Hall in the big community center gymnasium, I guess you'd call it, so that there was enough room. And again, it was not only the chiefs this time, but also several of the other election inspectors that were serving throughout those days. Tremendously successful. The first day alone, we had over 500 people that came in. We had a line when we arrived, you know, to do our jobs. There was a line way out into the parking lot. And we averaged, I think, about 200 people a day that came in and did that. Curbside voting. Curbside voting has always been an option for people too, but generally it's considered for those people who are physically unable to come into the the polling location. And this time, though, we were using it and encouraging people, anyone who had active COVID, to use that option instead of coming in and exposing all kinds of people to it. So we were also, by the November election, had smartened up about it and had people call us ahead of time so we knew what time they were coming so that we could prepare. And not only wearing masks, but then putting on a face guard, preparing the materials to take out to the people. The people would show us their ID through the car window so we could take down the information. We'd write that on a log sheet. And instead of, usually you take their ID and you go into the polling location, and that's how you get the ballot and all of that. But this time we write down the information that we needed so that we didn't have to touch their IDs. Went in, got the ballot, got the envelope, brought it back out to them, put it on a clipboard. They used their own pens. We kind of slid it through a car window very carefully. They filled it all out. We watched them do it. We had them fold up the ballot, put it into the envelope, had them sign it, and then put it back on the clipboard. They gave us the clipboard. And by the way, we also wore gloves so that we weren't actually touching it. And then took all of that back in and sprayed the heck out of it. We sprayed even the paper, and we let that paper sit until it dried. And then we could sign it as witnesses and put it in with the rest of the ballots. But we didn't want to contaminate, you know, the rest of the ballots with the ones that were there. We weren't quite that sophisticated back in April. And in fact, I kind of got freaked out a little bit when one of my curbside voters, with her window down, no mask on, said, "Oh yeah, I'm positive." And I was like, "Oh goodness, yeah, right." Mm-hmm. But happily, I didn't get it. So all turned out well.
Amazing how you were able to adapt to let all the voters who came, even with COVID, were able to vote.
Yeah.
That's quite a remarkable story.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to Election Day itself on November 3rd. Would you go through Election Day with us and then describe where you were located specifically, how the day went, what the atmosphere was like, and maybe what stood out to you about Election Day?
Okay. All right. Well, election day for the inspectors starts early. We start at 6 o'clock. Um, so at 6 o'clock, I was over at the Wyndham Garden Inn, which is where, over on Cahill, Maine, which is where District 3 is. And when I arrived, there were already voters in line. This is 6 o'clock in the morning. Polls don't open until 7, but they were
It's
there.
dark. It's
Yeah,
dark out.
it was dark. Absolutely, it was dark. So my job at that point, well, and I need to say, um, we try to have two chief election inspectors at each polling location. So it isn't just me. I've got another person helping me. But what we do between 6 and 6:30 is, get the lights on, turn on all of the equipment, turn on the machines, the tabulators, there's a report that we have to run off of each of the tabulators that proves that there's no ballots inside. Nothing's been counted yet. So we've got to get those reports run. We use the Badger book system developed by the Wisconsin Elections Commission. It's like a notebook computer and software, and we use that for processing absentee ballots, for checking voters in, and for registration. So all of that has to be started up and gotten ready for all of the workers. The workers come in at 6:30. And as I said, I had 6 people who had never worked before. I had a few people who had never used the Badger books before. So we were scrambling, trying to, get everybody situated into their particular position and get them to understand what they needed to do. Also, had to get the ballots ready. The ballots are locked up in the tabulators until we arrived. So had to unlock and get all the ballots out, get those over to the ballot table, get the people there started with. Each of the ballots have to have 2 initials on them. And we got to make sure that they are stamped with that we got the right ones, that they're stamped with the right wards and all of that. So got those people started with that. And then promptly at 7 o'clock, open the polls. And by that time, we had people lined up and way across the parking lot. And we just went constantly for at least, I would say, until at least 9:30, 10 o'clock, something like that, before we could even take a breath. I mean, it was just a constant, everybody was there. They were very serious about wanting to vote, and very determined to take whatever time it was going to take. And so, yeah, it was a steady stream throughout the day. Yeah. Constant folks. We didn't really know what to expect on voting day. There'd been all kinds of potential for disruption and intimidation and that kind of thing. Basically, I had the police department on speed dial in case we needed them. As a chief elections inspector, it's my job to tell people to leave if they are causing a disruption. So, we were prepared if we were going to have that. But happily, as it turned out, it was just the opposite. At one point, somebody came in and they said, "Did you know, Sonia, that there's a vendor out there? There's a food cart out in the parking lot, and there's live music." And there was, and throughout, I don't know whether it was noon or what time, I'm not sure, I don't recall what time, but throughout the afternoon, it was like a party out there. It was wonderful. And yes, I had people, if you picture the location, I had people across the parking lot, down the hill, down Cahill, Maine, and down all the way to Fishattree Road that were in line waiting. And it was primarily because they were all being really good about 6 feet apart, staying socially distant. And even with that, I've got to say, we we processed them fairly quickly. I asked a few people, well, how long have you been in line? And they would say, well, I was expecting, maybe a couple hours, but it's only been like 20 minutes, so 20 minutes, a half hour. So I felt really good about the fact that we were able to get those folks going through. Um, People were very respectful of us, which was nice. I mean, I had to turn some people away um, to be able to vote, and you got to be registered. And I had about 300 people that came in that needed to register during the day. Yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot of people. And to register, you have to be living in the city of Fitchburg at your current address, for at least 28 days. And I had a few people that were 20 days, 2 weeks, whatever. They just didn't meet the requirement. And some of them were Fitchburg residents. I mean, they had previously lived in Fitchburg too. But unfortunately, they hadn't registered at that previous address. And so I couldn't let them vote. I mean, if they had been registered at their previous address, I could have had them vote a presidential only ballot, and that would have worked. But I couldn't. So I had a few people that it was a few. I mean, it wasn't many. Anybody who came in who wanted to vote but didn't have an ID, didn't have the proper ID. No, you can't vote in Wisconsin with an Illinois driver's license. You can't do that. Um, those folks, we offered a provisional vote, the option to vote provisionally. And then they have, so what that does is they fill out a ballot, we put it in a special envelope, seal it, and we'll take that to City Hall. And they have until the Friday, 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon after the election. And if they bring their photo ID, a valid photo ID, or their passport, for example, then we can certify and validate that ballot and add that to the total. But you know, and we had quite a few people who filled out provisional ballots citywide. But when it came right down to it, on Monday when our Board of Canvass met, we only had 2 people, I think, that had come back with the IDs. But at least they have that option. So we work really hard to make sure that everybody can vote who is eligible, and that their votes will be counted.
Mm.
So at 8 o'clock then, promptly shut the polls down. Anybody who's in line at that point or in the building can continue to vote and until they're all gone. Then I close the polls on the tabulators, run the reports there from the tabulators, then modem the results from there directly to Dane County. And that's where they get the early results from. Run reports, close the polls on the Badger Book stuff, close down the express vote. Then we pull out all of the ballots out of the tabulators, and all of those have to be sorted. And they're sorted because we had 4 different ballot types. All of those were sorted into 4 different piles. And then within those 4 different piles, we had absentee versus regular ballots, any ballots that had to be remade. And then we had to find and record all of the write-in ballots. So there were like 16 different piles, so to speak. And then all of those are put into a ballot bag, and they're sealed, labeled, and those are locked back into the tabulators and brought back to City Hall. So those ballots are never out of control, out of sight. And they're always locked up, and they're always secure. Most of my workers, that all takes a long time, and then we got to pack everything up. tear it down, put it away. Most of my workers were able to leave, I think about 9:30 or so. So it wasn't too bad. The other chief and I were there. I think we checked out at about 11, because it took a lot to put things away. We had reports and numbers to crunch and such to do. So
Long,
it was a
long day.
long day, but it was fun. We had a good time. It is good time with all those
How
folks.
wonderful to hear you say that, Sonia, to have your personal story about the even though the long hours, the certainly there must have been stress along with that and maybe some tension wondering how the day would go and then getting people trained and up and going. But then at the end of the day, to feel that sense of accomplishment and satisfaction, I would think, and know that you had, and to actually be able to use the word fun
It
also
is, it is
connected
fun.
with how the day went. Um, well, and then counting of the ballots. So I think we heard pretty much about that. And there was certainly a large volume of absentee ballots due to COVID-19 also this year. So all of those need to be counted. So really a huge job, isn't it, to make sure
Yeah.
that all of that does get done.
Yeah, we had about 3,000 absentee ballots that we had just in my district. Overall, I think it was like 19,000 for the city of Fitchburg. All of those are checked in through WisVote, and then they're looked over again on the Saturday before the election. All of the chiefs get together. This year we had some helpers from some of our other election inspectors too, because there were so many. And we do an audit and we make sure that everything that was in WisVote, we have a physical ballot for. So it's that we're checking over those envelopes again, making sure that everybody has signed them. They've got the witness and the witness address and all of that information. And all along the way, we keep finding ones that we've missed, and oops, here's one that without a signature. So, city staff jump in, they call the people, or they email them and say, if you can get in here, or if you can go to the poll, your ballot will be held there, and if you can get that information, completed, then your ballot will be counted, but otherwise it's going to have to be rejected. And I did have one person who came in, I don't know, in the evening, actually, almost towards the end of the night. And she came in, she showed me her ID, and it was, oh, this is my person that has this ballot that was missing a signature. So she could sign her ballot, and we could put it in and record it. But yeah, there's multiple checks along the way to make sure that it's done well. And then all of those ballot envelopes are counted at the end of the night. And then that's balanced against the report that we run out from Badger Books to make sure that, oh yeah, okay, we got the right numbers. So yeah, a lot of work.
A lot of work, a lot of work. And yet also part of that work is following through with voters to just make sure if they come in, if there's something wrong, that they have that opportunity, almost like a second chance. So here's what's missing. If you come in by this time before the polls close, we will see that this gets certified for you. Um, Wonderful checks and balances that work in the system to hear about, Sonia.
Yeah, there's
Um,
one more piece of that too. Uh, we always encourage people when they come in to vote to wait after they feed the ballot, so that it says thank you and it actually accepts it. But of course, with the absentee ballots, you don't have those people, and so when the tabulator rejects it, we have the opportunity to take a look at that ballot then and see, can we tell what the voter really intended? And if we can, then we can remake the ballots. So, for example, people don't follow directions. It
Really?
says, it says use black ink, not red, not green. Don't be creative. It says fill in the little circle, not put a check mark, not put an X, fill in the circle. So those are the kinds of things that we have to do. It's like, okay, it's obvious here that this person was voting for this. But yeah. hmm So
Oh,
those are
but
the, and we had about 45 ballots that we had to remake.
mhm.
So we put a green sticker on the remade one and a red sticker on the bad one. The bad ones are put into an envelope that's sealed. And now at the recount, those were all taken out. They were compared, making sure that we did it properly. You know
Oh,
that we had signed them. There have to be two people working on this. Can't be just one. It's got to be two people. Made sure that we signed them all. So yeah,
all
that's
those checks and balances, they're just wonderful to hear about the details of how the accuracy
yeah.
is so ensured with all the checks and balances that are there in the system.
Yeah.
Sonia, do you have any other closing remarks about the election during this year of COVID that maybe we haven't discussed yet that you'd like to mention?
Well, the one thing that I really want people to understand is what a terrific city clerk and staff we have. Tracy Oldenburg is just phenomenal, incredibly organized, just a delight to work with, and her staff. I've been at City Hall a lot over the last few weeks during the election season. They are so patient when people call. um, they are so gracious, and that they're working. I mean, they're working before, during, and after the election. They're putting in long days, and they can still be so good and so helpful. So I need to raise that up. At what a gracious staff we have for the
Oh,
city of Fitchburg. They're
how
they're
wonderful to
wonderful.
hear. Wonderful to hear that, and that Fitchburg can feel so fortunate to
Yeah.
have that quality of people working for the city. And then to turn maybe our attention to you personally, also, Sonia. What motivates you to put in that extraordinarily long hours? You were describing election day, but all the other elections and getting ready for and taking the great care you do in making sure that every eligible voter has the opportunity to cast their ballot and have their vote counted. What motivates you to do that?
Oh, yeah. A couple of things actually. I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and I remember quite vividly President Kennedy's inaugural admonishment, shall we say, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. Well, I didn't volunteer to go off to the Vietnam War, um, but I've always looked for something that I can do for my community. My dad was a veteran. He was in the Army during World War II, and in fact, 14 months of his life, he was a prisoner of war. And
Mhm.
so, serving your community is really important to us. Having the ability, the freedom to vote, has been really important in my family. And I figure I'm not one that's going to be out there protesting and marching and that kind of thing. But I can work at the polls. It's something I can do, and so I'm proud to be able to serve my city of Fitchburg as an elections inspector.
Oh, Sonia, thank you so much. And on behalf of the residents of the city of Fitchburg, just a huge gratitude to you for all you've done to make these elections with their special challenges this year in particular um, go so smoothly and accurately and securely. Um, a huge debt of gratitude for you and staff you worked with and the city staff for making all of that possible. And I think just to say thank you to the citizens of Fitchburg for standing in those lines patiently
Yeah.
and uh, and showing up to do the duty that we all have as living in a democracy. Um, you have the story to tell of how that is done, how those votes are taken and counted and secured. I'd just like to mention also that Sonia's interview will be not only on Talking Fitchburg, but on the Fitchburg Historical Society website. So we'd encourage people to check that out, fitchburghistory.org. And again, Sonia, thank you so much for your time and all you've done for the city of Fitchburg in the elections this year. We're
You're
so
welcome.
grateful.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.